Solving linear equations with one variable, Chapter 3, Lesson 1, Part 1. So first we're going to talk about using the distributive property in order to solve equations. So in your example here, we have a lot of parts. We have 2x minus 1 over 3 plus x plus 4 over 4 plus 3 over 2. So these are all written in fraction forms. Remember that anytime you're doing anything with fractions that involves adding or subtracting, you need to make them have a common denominator. So you'd have to find the least common multiple of 3, 4, and 2 in order to make all of these fractions have the same denominator, and the least common multiple is 12. So you're going to have to do the math to turn all of these into something over 12. So I know that 3 times 4 is 12, 4 times 3 is 12, and 2 times 6 is 12. So actually, don't worry about this side yet. So in order to make the denominators 12, I have to multiply them by those numbers as well as the numerators. So you see here, I take the 4 and I multiply it times everything on the top. And in the second term, I take the 3 and multiply it times everything on the top. That is what is using the distributive property. So the distributive property, remember, tells us that anything on the outside of the parentheses gets multiplied times everything inside. So 4 times 2x is where you get 8x. You keep the subtraction sign, and 4 times 1 is 4. And then you do the same here. 3 times x is 3x plus 12, because 3 times 4 is 12. And then you can just have them all over 12 here. So we're combining terms. 8x and 3x, because they're both positive, becomes 11x. And minus 4 plus 12 becomes plus 8. So now we have 11x plus 8 over 12 equals 3 over 2. So now you can start solving. Remember, when we're solving an equation, we want to do the opposite, or we want to move the things furthest away from our variable as possible. So since we're dividing by 12, we're going to do the inverse and multiply both sides by 12, which they did here. That would cancel out. So we're left with 11x plus 8. And then 3 over 2 times 12 is 18. And if you're unsure why, just remember 3 over 2 times 12 over 1 would be 36 over 2. And 36 divided by 2 is 18. And now we're just going to start moving things away again from the variable. So in this case, they subtract 8 from both sides. That cancels out here. And over here, we'd be left with 10. 18 minus 8 is 10. And then we're left with 11. At that point, we'd be left with 11x equals 10. And then we have to divide by 11 here on both sides. Should get the x alone. That cancels out. So you're just left with x equals 10 or over 11. Please leave it in fraction form. There's no reason to turn it into a decimal. If you can simplify a fraction, get it into lowest terms, but 10 over 11 in this case is in simplest terms. All right, so let's try number 16 here together. Solve the equation 7x over 2 minus 1 minus x over 2 equals 4. Well, we've lucked out here because both of our denominators are 2. So we're not going to have to do the distributive property anywhere. So all I'm going to do is combine everything on the top. 7x minus 1 minus x, which actually they're doing plus x because what they did here, they had 7x over 2 and they did plus a negative 1 times 1 minus x. So they distributed that negative 1, which is where we get minus 1, and then negative 1 times a negative x would be a positive x. And then that's all still over 2 equals 4. So we're going to combine like terms. 7x and the positive x is 8x minus 1 over 2 equals 4. And now we're just going to start solving. So we have 8x minus 1 over 2 equals 4. So I'm going to multiply both sides by, not 4, by 2. So these will cancel out, and I'd be left with 8x minus 1 equals 8, because 4 times 2 is 8. Now I need to add 1 to both sides. So I'm left with 8x equals 9. I need to get rid of the 8 through division. So that cancels out. And x equals 9 over 8, which as a mixed number equals 1 and 1/8. All right, let's try number 17. 2x plus x over 2 equals 5 over 2. Remember, this is not a fraction, so to make it one, I'm just going to put it over 1. And I need to make these have common denominators before I can do anything to it. So I'm going to have to multiply both my bottom and my top by 2, because the common denominator here is obviously 2. So 2 times 2x is 4x over 2. And then we have x plus x over 2 equals 5 over 2. Here's a little trick, and you don't have to do it this way. But if you get a problem like this where all of the denominators wind up being the same, they all can just cancel out. So really this problem is just 4x plus x equals 5. 4x plus x is 5x equals 5. And we divide by 5 on both sides, which would cancel that out. So x equals 1. Now, it would have worked out the same if you would have left the denominators there. I just want to show that to you, that it would have just been 4x plus x over 2 equals 5 over 2. And that would simplify to 5x over 2 equals 5 over 2. I'd multiply both sides by 2. That would cancel out. And that would make this 5x equals 10 over 2, which we know simplifies down into 5x equals 5. And you see it's the same thing over there. All right, so number 18, we have a different situation now. I have a denominator of 3 and 6. So I need to, the least common multiple of 3 and 6 is 2. Or I'm sorry, is 6. So I have to multiply everything by 2 in this one. So now I need to do the distributive property. 2 times 5x is 10x plus 2, because 1 times 2 is 2. And then I can just transfer this into minus 3 minus 4x. Remember in that last problem, we're actually multiplying a negative 1 through there. And that's all over 6 equals 3/4. So now I combine like terms. 10x minus 4x is 6x. Positive 2 minus 3 is a negative 1. 6x minus 1 over 6 equals 3/4. So now I'm going to start solving. I want to multiply both sides times 6. This side will cancel out. And this would become 18 over 4. So what I'm left with is 6x minus 1 equals 18 over 4. And 18 over 4 simplifies all the way down to 6x minus 1 equals 4 1/2. So now I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And I get 6x equals 5 1/2. Or in this case, I'm going to keep it as 11 halves. And I'm going to divide both sides by 6. So 11 halves. I'm running out of space here, divided by 6. Remember, we do key flip change. I'm just going to do it up here where I have room. So I would have 11 over 2 times 1 over 6. It ended up being 11 twelfths. So your answer here is x equals 11 twelfths. All right, and lastly today we'll do number 19. We have 4 fifths plus x over 4 equals x minus 1. So again, we want to make common denominators. So the least common multiple of 5 and 4 is going to be 20. So in this case, I need to multiply everything times 4, and in this case, times 5. So 4 times 4 is 16 over 20 plus 5x over 20 equals still x minus 1. So I'm going to combine my terms here because I don't have any, so I just have 16 plus 5x over 20 equals x minus 1. So now I got to multiply both sides by 20 by 20. Remember, I have to multiply everything over here by 20. So that'll cancel out. I'll get 16 plus 5x equals 20x minus 20. And I'm just going to start combining terms. Here I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. Again, you can do it whichever way you want. This way just seems easier to me. So now I'd be left with 16 equals, because that cancels out, 15x minus 20. I'm going to add 20 to both sides, add 20. So that will give me 36 equals 15x. And I divide both sides by 15. 15, so that would be 36 over 15 equals x. And then in mixed number form, that would be 2 and 6/15, or 2 and 2/5 equals x. So again, this is going to take some practice. Remember, always use the distributive property, and you can't do anything with fractions unless they have common denominators first.